Dear Patriots, before the news starts, please subscribe to our patriotic channel by clicking the subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up to this video. Don't forget to leave your opinion below in the comments section. Share the news on Facebook and Twitter so your friends see it. Thank you.
Putin warns that Russia has nuclear weapons that can evade defense systems. Russian President Vladimir Putin touted his nation's nuclear arsenal in his State of the Nation speech Thursday, warning the U.S. that Russia now has nuclear weapons that can get around defense systems. Efforts to contain Russia have failed, face it, Putin said, according to multiple news reports. The Russian president's speech was interspersed with video of his nation's weaponry, including underwater drones, a hypersonic system that heads for its target like a meteorite, and intercontinental missiles. Relations between the U.S. and Russia have deteriorated badly over the past several years in the wake of an effort by former President Barack Obama to reset relations between the former Cold War rivals. Most recently, Russia has been accused of mounting a campaign to interfere in the 2016 presidential election with the intention of sowing doubt in the U.S. political system and aiding the candidacy of President Donald Trump. The two nations have also been at odds over the ongoing civil war in Syria, where Russia backs the government of Bashar Assad and the U.S. backs certain rebel groups. Putin, in his speech on Thursday, said Russia had warned the U.S. not to move forward with anti-missile systems that the Kremlin worried would blunt its nuclear deterrent. "Nobody listened to us. Listen now," he said. The White House responded Thursday afternoon that the Trump administration will protect the U.S. and preserve peace. Russia's been developing destabilizing weapon systems for over a decade in direct violation of its treaty obligations, White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said. U.S. defense capabilities are and will remain second to none. Could gun control flip the House to Democrats? Democrats are campaigning hard in Congress for new gun control laws, but don't expect them to do the same across the election map this fall. As a renewed, nationwide push for gun control faces an uphill battle in Congress, some progressive outside groups are prodding Democrats to make gun restrictions a driving issue in the midterms. There are signs some candidates will take heed, using GOP inaction on guns as one piece of a larger case against the Republican-controlled Congress. But many other Democrats worry that nationalizing the issue in the midterms would undercut some of their most vulnerable members, or hinder Democrats challenging GOP incumbents, in rural areas from Ohio and Indiana to Montana and California's Yosemite Valley. To the extent that gun control has been a defining factor in recent elections, it's been to motivate single-issue Second Amendment voters to put more Republicans in office. Despite the spate of mass shootings over the past decade, Democrats have yet to show that they can make Republican opponents of stricter gun controls pay a price at the ballot box. And while there's no doubt that national support for stricter gun policies has surged in the aftermath of the Florida school rampage earlier this month, a CNN poll out Sunday found support for tighter gun laws at 70%, its highest level since 1993. Democrats in swing districts and states recognize they risk overplaying their hand and energizing the right. At times you have to look at yourself in the mirror and do the right thing and say forget about the political consequences, said Representative Tom O'Halloran, Democrat Arizona, who faces a tough re-election this fall in a vast, Republican-leaning rural district. O'Halloran, who in the past has backed expanded background checks but opposed a ban on assault weapons, said he is wary of getting hit for inching toward the center on guns. "I'm always worried about it. I'm in a tight race all the time, but I came here to do a job," he said. Multiple Democratic political operatives said they will surgically deploy the issue in select competitive states and House districts, especially those racked by mass shootings. If the battle for House control comes down to a handful of seats, that could make gun control a significant factor. In Colorado's 6th District in the Denver suburbs, a perennial toss-up where the 2012 horror movie theater shooting took place, One of Republican Representative Mike Kaufman's Democratic opponents released a web ad last week hitting the incumbent for failed leadership and taking tens of thousands of dollars from the National Rifle Association. Democratic Senators Bill Nelson of Florida, Bob Casey of Pennsylvania and Tim Kaine of Virginia are also leaning hard into new firearm restrictions, and Democrats are looking to oust House GOP incumbents representing suburban House districts in Florida, Northern Virginia and Nevada whom they believe are out of step with their constituents on guns. But the political reality in Washington means that new gun control laws, whether an assault weapons ban or universal background checks, are unlikely to pass until gun control advocates defeat recalcitrant Republicans or the president makes a sustained push for them. Until then, lawmakers and strategists in both parties say, the issue will more often hurt than help Democrats running in conservative House districts and states. If you're in any of these states that voted for Donald Trump, there's a strong record of support for the Second Amendment. They are going to have, to, navigate some very challenging issues, said Senator Cory Gardner of Colorado, the Senate GOP's campaign chairman. Senator Joe Manchin, DW. Virginia, co-sponsored a bill to expand background checks after the Sandy Hook, Connecticut, elementary school shooting in 2012 that netted 54 votes, 6 short of breaking a filibuster. But Manchin, who's on the ballot this year in what's expected to be a tough race, said he's not inclined to try again unless President Donald Trump gets on board. "I'm a realist, this is in Trump's ballpark," said Manchin, who met with the president on Wednesday. "There's some people wanting failed gun votes to use for political leverage," he added, "but it makes no sense at all unless they just want to show off." Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat Connecticut, who represents the state where the Sandy Hook massacre happened, said he believes gun control is a winning political issue for the party. "The days of the NRA getting everything they want seem to be over," said Murphy on Wednesday. His remarks came after Trump, at a meeting with lawmakers at the White House, seemed to endorse the Manchin-Toomey's background checks bill along with several other gun measures. Trump has often taken positions only to reverse himself in short order. But his comments Wednesday could scramble the traditional dynamics of gun politics in the midterms if he sticks to them. Outside progressive groups argue that Democrats would be foolish not to run on gun control, especially in suburban districts that Hillary Clinton carried in 2016 or in areas where shootings have unnerved voters. Andrew Bates of American Bridge said his group would be unrelenting in going after centrist Republicans who don't push their leadership to take up gun restrictions. "If someone is being an obstacle to change on this, that underscores better than anything the need for voting someone else in," Bates said. "Arizona, Nevada, Florida, we think that there is a large consensus on this in these states and across the country and even among Republicans voters." Republicans have their own internal tensions. Some of their vulnerable House members want the party to compromise on issues like universal background checks and age limits for purchasing rifles. Representative Brian Mast, Republican Florida, who is in a competitive Florida district near the Parkland school shooting, endorsed an assault weapons ban last weekend. Other top Florida Republicans, including Senator Marco Rubio and Governor Rick Scott, have said they're open to increasing the age to purchase certain rifles and limiting magazine size or expanding firearms restraining orders for severely mentally ill people. But most of the House Republican Conference has no interest in going there. GOP leaders and most Republicans argue that if Democrats want to make guns a campaign issue, they will lose. They say that most voters care primarily about the economy, jobs and health care, and view gun control, like immigration, as being far removed from what motivates most voters. "Bring it on," said Representative Tom McClintock, Republican California, when asked whether he's worried that a Democratic challenger in this competitive but GOP-leaning district might make gun control a campaign issue. McClintock represents a sprawling mountainous district, stretching from the Sacramento suburbs to Yosemite and the High Sierras, where guns are popular. Democrats who want to turn this into a political issue may find it's not as fertile as they thought, National Republican Congressional Committee Chairman Steve Stivers said in an interview this week. "I think they'll find it's not any kind of slam dunk for them." but both parties say the topic could be central in suburban districts, where educated women are worried about their kids' safety at schools. CNN's Sunday poll shows that 77% of women respondents favor stricter gun laws versus 62% of men. Swing state Democratic senators are proceeding cautiously. Manchin and Montana Senator John Tester, two of the 5 most vulnerable Democrats up for re-election, said it would be better for Democrats to accept a modest bill that improves background checks rather than end up with nothing by pushing for more expansive measures. "You get a piece of the pie," Tester said. "You still get something that's going to be helpful." Senator Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota, another endangered incumbent, is the only member of the Democratic caucus who opposed the bipartisan expanded background checks bill in 2013. She declined to say whether she could back a revised version being worked on by Manchin and Senator Pat Toomey, ARPA. "We don't know what the actual bill's going to look like, what the administration is saying," said Heitkamp. "I'm going to kind of analyze it as it goes." Why hardening schools hasn't stopped school shootings. President Donald Trump has called for hardened schools to end the cycle of school massacres. But he was unimpressed last week when told about a Midwestern campus dubbed the safest school in America. An Indiana state official had suggested he consider Southwestern High in Shelbyville a national prototype because of its state-of-the-art cameras that send real-time footage to a sheriff's office, smoke cannons in hallways, bulletproof doors and teachers who wear panic buttons. Trump had only one question: "Do you have anybody inside with a gun that can take on the man that's right outside the door, that by the way, can shoot right through the steel doors?" Trump has defined school hardening as arming officials inside schools, a model already in wide practice using law enforcement officials, rather than teachers, and which has not stopped the carnage except in a handful of isolated successes. Research is spotty, but it suggests that simply fortifying schools, whether through the presence of armed officials or beefed up security, does little to reduce the likelihood of school shootings and is not nearly as effective as identifying threats and intervening early to address them. School shootings are prevented because shooters make threats, people pay attention to those threats and intervene, and those shootings are prevented, said Dewey Cornell, a forensic clinical psychologist and education professor at the University of Virginia who focuses on school violence prevention. "We need to focus a lot more on prevention. The best way to prevent school shootings everywhere is to help our kids be successful at school." That view is shared by Guy Grace, security director for Littleton, Colorado, public schools, which still bear the scars of the 1999 Columbine shooting that killed 13 people and a second shooting in 2013 that left 2 students dead. Grace said he got goosebumps from the similarities between the shooter who killed 17 people in Parkland, Florida, and the Littleton senior who stormed Arapahoe High School 5 years ago with a shotgun, 125 rounds of ammunition, a machete and 3 Molotov cocktails, killing a student and himself. "The guy that shot up our school, same thing," he said. "There were warning signs before he did it and no follow-up." After Columbine, the community had hired armed school resource officers and spent an estimated $25 million to fortify its schools, Grace said. Nonetheless, an investigation found that there were many missed opportunities to share information about senior Carl Pearson's anger problems, threats and gun ownership and to intervene before he entered the school. Grace acknowledged that an armed officer likely prevented further loss of life that day. After Pearson fatally shot 17-year-old Claire Esther Davis, he headed to the library, where the officer had rushed to meet him. Pearson then turned the gun on himself. "It's good to have law enforcement or trained professionals in the buildings," Grace said. "But I don't believe these people are going to stop because of the armed presence in schools." What might have been prevented the attack altogether was paying more attention to reports of Pearson's mental distress and ensuring he couldn't get his hands on a shotgun. "We hardened our facilities, but if we can focus more on being preventative as a nation, then we can go a long way," Grace said. Hardening security was Indiana's single-minded focus after the Sandy Hook massacre in Newtown, Connecticut, in 2012. Southwestern High School was chosen by the Indiana Sheriff's Association to test a state-of-the-art security program, put in place in 2015. Indiana Attorney General Curtis Hill told Trump last week the school has countermeasures that can be employed from the sheriff's department within seconds to contain the attacker and, in a sense, turn the attack on them. For example, smoke canisters can be released to blind and confuse a shooter. That gives time, as you know, that critical time when he's alone looking for targets, Hill told Trump last week, according to a transcript of the meeting. Now he is discombobulated, he doesn't know where he's going. Hopefully, Trump said. Well, that's the idea, Hill said. I mean, these are not. In the meantime, he's shooting everybody, though, Trump said. But Hill said in an interview with Politico that Indiana schools, including Southwestern, also prioritize detecting threats and intervention. A very significant part of the program is knowing their students, knowing what their issues are and knowing their concerns, he said. You're looking for signs of stress in a child's life, various signs that point to whether a child is in need of intervention. Many schools are doing that, and we just need to make sure that all schools are doing that. Virginia took a very different tack after Sandy Hook, becoming the first state in the nation to ensure that all public schools were assessing potential student threats, based on Cornell's research on violence prevention. Every public school in the state has a threat assessment team trained to identify such threats, evaluate their seriousness and take appropriate action, whether referring the student to counseling, mental health services or police intervention. The model has been endorsed by Sandy Hook Promise, a national nonprofit organization founded and led by several family members whose loved ones were killed at Sandy Hook. Cornell is often asked whether the model has prevented school shootings. That's tough to determine, he said. Virginia schools conducted more than 9,000 threat assessments last year, and none resulted in death or serious injury, Cornell said. Schools have seen fewer racial disparities in school discipline, fewer suspensions and fewer instances of bullying. They've also created a climate in which students feel safer talking to adults and teachers have reported feeling safer, he said. We've had hundreds of kids who've threatened to shoot somebody or hurt somebody, but they didn't, he said. When people pay attention to those threats and intervene, those shootings are prevented. Still, a recent University of Virginia news release noted that the Florida shooting should be a wake-up call for threat assessment teams in Virginia schools. Statewide surveys have found that only 50% of Virginia K-12 teachers know that their school has a threat assessment team, the release said. Also troubling is that state funding to train school teams has fallen off the state's priority list, and despite the state mandate, 34% of Virginia schools reported that they did not conduct any threat assessments last year.